Hey, it's Nikki, and today's episode is a special series called In the Loop, Communicating for Maximum Leadership Impact with my friends from Borshoff. I am a huge fan of the work Borshoff does to advance internal communication, and so happy that they have joined Gut Plus Science for a special series. Get ready for internal communication inspiration. There's so many nuggets of wisdom here.
Hey, it's Katherine Coble, your host for a very special Gut Plus Science series called In the Loop, Communicating for Maximum Leadership Impact. Our big goal is to help leaders become better communicators, because communication is your best tool for leading well. Let's go ahead and dive into this month's topic. Have you ever received a one-word email that just completely derailed your mood? Something like, thanks. That's it. Just thanks. And suddenly you're wondering, are they annoyed? Was that sarcastic? Did I miss something? Are we good? Or maybe it's the opposite. You send a thoughtful note, you hit send, and then nothing. No response, no acknowledgement, just silence. And now you're trying to fill in the blanks. Well, here's what's fascinating. In a world where most of our communication happens through screens, we think that we've lost body language. No facial expressions, no tone of voice, no crossed arms, no nodding heads. But the fact is, we haven't actually lost body language, we've just replaced it. Today, we are swimming in what author and researcher Erica Dhawan calls digital body language. The signals that we send through our response time, maybe through our punctuation, the formatting that we use, the channel choice that we make, how we behave in online meetings, how we follow up with people, and even in how we use silence. A delayed response actually means something. A period at the end of a short sentence means something. Choosing Slack over a phone call, it communicates something. And not replying at all definitely means something. And whether we intend it or not, as leaders, we are constantly sending signals. We're sending signals about priority. We're sending signals about trust. We're sending signals about inclusion and about respect. Now, over the years, working with clients and various teams, I've seen a lot of relationships actually strengthened, but I've seen some that have been strained too, not because of strategy, but because of talent, because of misread signals in digital communications. Assumptions were made, maybe intent was misinterpreted, and silence often spoke volumes. So today, I want to unpack some of my biggest takeaways from Erica Dhawan's book, Digital Body Language, and share what I've learned in real life about how we can become more intentional, more clear in our communication, and more connected in the way that we lead through our screens. Because if you think about it, connection doesn't just happen by accident anymore. We have to be intentional or we risk being misunderstood. So let's get started with what exactly is digital body language. Well, digital body language is made up of all of the cues and the signals that we send through all sorts of actions that we take in our digital communications. It can include things like our response time, the way that we use punctuation, the tone that we take, or maybe the perceived tone that we take in our communication, the choice of channels that we use, how we behave in virtual meetings, eye contact, and whether or not we're using mute, things like that. And even in our follow-up patterns, when we send a response to people or we follow up with meeting notes, things like that. Now, when we interact with others in person, we tend to read facial expressions and posture, but online, we read things like speed or brevity, formatting, and even silence. Now, I recall a recent text exchange I had with a group of friends. We had a newer friend who had just recently been added to this group, and I sent a response to something that she said that was my typical sarcasm, and I was trying to be funny. She immediately responded with an apology, thinking that she had overstepped her bounds in her earlier response. But in reality, I was just kidding. And I felt really bad because she thought she had done something wrong, but it was really just my poor attempt at humor, and it just didn't translate in the text. Now, you probably have stories like this too. Maybe it was a time when you were misread by a client or a teammate, or when someone maybe misread you. Many times these misunderstandings, they're harmless and they can be quickly resolved, but it's important to recognize that with digital communication, there really is no neutral ground. It really is loaded with all sorts of meaning, whether you intend it to or not. Reading emotion within the digital workplace is difficult. When we don't have those nonverbal body cues, we can assume meaning that just isn't there, or we can misinterpret the things that are there. And this is just so important because in the workplace today, roughly 70% of all communication among teams is virtual. 70%, that's huge. Another statistic I heard was that half the time someone reads our email, the tone is misinterpreted. Half the time they think our tone is different than what we intended. So, let's talk about some ways that we can help raise our awareness of our digital body language and just do better to help clarify and communicate well with others. We'll use Erica Dhawan's book as our inspiration, and I'll link to that in the show notes. And I would just really encourage you to read it for yourself because there are so many good nuggets in it, and we won't have time to even barely scratch the surface today. So, my first big learning from studying digital body language is that speed equals a signal. And here's what I mean by that. Everyone has their own expectation about when, where, and how to communicate. And in a digital age, the speed at which you respond communicates just as much as the words that you share. So, Erica talks about how response time sends some pretty powerful messages. Just a few examples that she brings up. An immediate reply often communicates priority or maybe even anxiety. A 48-hour delay in responding, well, that typically means low importance. Whether that's intentional or not, that's the way people tend to read a 2-day response. And sometimes, you know how you can tell that someone has seen your message, but they haven't yet responded? Well, that often creates some emotional ambiguity. That leaves people wondering, where is your state of mind because you aren't responding to me? Now, as a leader, you have to look at this through a very intentional lens. You should know that your response time sets a culture in your organization. Teams are watching what leaders prioritize. And clients, they're interpreting your responsiveness as care or lack thereof. So I remember a time when I was working with a client at a very large corporation, and she had multiple agencies working on various projects. And I would typically respond to her emails within 24 hours. And one time she told me that she was always so blown away by how quickly she got her responses from anyone on her Borshoff team. And that made me pretty proud. She said, sometimes my other agencies don't even respond to me for 3 or 4 days. Now, I have to tell you, I was a little shocked that she would even continue working with agencies that were that unresponsive. I had always been taught that quick responses to clients were really a sign of respect and strong client service. That's what the leaders at my agency taught me and what they really instilled in me. And that's the tradition that we have continued at Borshoff. Now, to make sure that response times don't create confusion or anxiety, it's really critical that the leader actually communicate expectations very, very explicitly. Make sure your team knows that they really understand what is expected. What is the general expected norm for turnaround response? And remember, silence speaks for you in the absence of any communication. Okay, another takeaway. Brevity can build trust, but it can also break it. Short messages are efficient, but they can also be very ambiguous. So think about these two different messages. On the one hand, the response is, looks good. On the other hand, the response is, this looks great, especially the second section. Let's move forward. Now, when you think about those two responses, there are a couple of key things I want to point out here. In a digital space, warmth must be intentional. If you send a very, very short message, very often people will interpret that as maybe cold. And if that's not your intent, you want to be careful about that. Micro affirmations can also go a long way to building trust and maintaining some momentum. So when people can hear those short little phrases of, this is great, appreciate your work, those kinds of things in your message to them, it just keeps the momentum going and keeps the project on track. And clarity can also reduce anxiety. Whenever people have good, clear instruction and information, they aren't left to guess. And as we all know, the human mind can very frequently go to the worst case scenario. In the absence of information, we tend to make up things that are a bit more negative. So you can reduce that for people by being sure that you're providing clarity and that you're providing detail. Leaders often think they're being clear when they're being minimal, but sometimes they're just creating this digital anxiety by the things that they're actually leaving out. So, a couple of things to keep in mind when you are writing a text or maybe a chat message or an email to others, ask yourself a couple of key questions and you can eliminate some of this anxiety for the person who's receiving your message. First, is my message clear? Second, is there any way this could be misinterpreted? Is this the right medium for this kind of message, the right channel? What's the power dynamic here? If I have more power in the situation, am I coming across as maybe terse or rushed or just vague? Some ways that you can work to correct these types of things are just by adding context. Maybe you need to use names so it's clear instead of saying he or she or him or her, you're being more specific about the person that you're referring to. Being explicit about appreciation is always something that's appreciated by teams, but also, again, it just is that affirmation that people need to know they're going on the right track and that they can keep going and making progress. Also, just replacing vague words or ideas with something a little bit more concrete, a little bit more specific. In digital communication, just remember clarity is kindness. Okay, my third takeaway, channel choice is a leadership decision. Now, in her book, Erica emphasizes that the medium you use sends a message beyond the words that you use. Here are some examples of what she's talking about. When should you use email versus Slack or maybe some other chat function? Now, typically, email is better when there is a need for more detailed communications, and Slack is seen as more of an instantaneous channel. But how you use these tools in the workplace may be dictated by what you use them for. So here's an example. When we rolled out Microsoft Teams to our entire agency, we made sure to provide some parameters around when to use that versus when to use email. In our agency, we ask our staff to keep all client related and project related communications in our Microsoft Teams channels. Now, the reason for that is that everyone has access to those channels and they can see past communications if they need some sort of information about a project, rather than having it hidden inside of various individual emails. And sometimes not all team members are on those emails. And if they need some sort of documentation for a decision that was made, we need them to be able to find that very easily. So for us, that's Microsoft Teams. Every client, every project has its own Teams channel. And so it's also a great way just to organize the details related to our work. What about chat versus a phone call? Well, sometimes picking up a phone can feel kind of old fashioned. We don't really do that a lot anymore. But if you need clarity or you have to have a little bit of maybe debate or discussion to get to a good decision, There's just nothing better than having a quick conversation rather than a lot of back and forth in a chat. Now, a phone call or even a video call is also a better choice when you need to deliver some hard feedback or some difficult news. It just gives you that opportunity to share a bit of emotion or to put some emphasis on certain elements of your message. Now, leaders should keep in mind that the channel that they use can put people on the defensive or even create some confusion. Just remember, public praise really does build culture. So consider using a public tool when you shout out to your teammates to proclaim the great work that they've done. Now, difficult feedback does not belong in a text. You really need to have a face to face conversation about it. These are all things that we know in our hearts to be true, but so often in the fast pace of our busy world, we either don't feel like we have the time to make room for a face-to-face conversation, or quite frankly, we like to hide behind the screen. And I'm just encouraging you as a leader, don't hide behind the screen for those difficult conversations. Now, to help you make a decision about the right channel to use, here's a framework that you might want to keep in mind. Before you send a message, ask yourself, is this emotional? Is this an emotional topic? Is it a complex topic? Are there some pretty high stakes here in terms of decision making or next steps? The answer is yes to any of these. You probably need to move up the intimacy ladder and pick a best channel for that moment. Now, here's my final takeaway around digital body language: make the invisible visible. Be proactive about explicitly showing you understand and value another person's participation or their input. In a video call, this can be as simple as keeping your camera on and nodding or responding with phrases such as, I'm listening, or go ahead. But when it comes to asynchronous written communication, you may have to be even more intentional. I love what Erica says in her book about the importance of comprehension. She says, reading carefully is the new listening. Think about that. If you want people to feel valued and respected, it first starts with truly understanding the written communication that they're sending you. Studies show that we actually read pretty poorly online or in a digital format compared to how we read in print. We're often moving too fast and we just don't go through our messages carefully. And then sometimes we can actually make the situation even worse because we're in such a hurry to respond and our response doesn't address the situation clearly. Now, you can show active listening skills in a digital conversation by doing a couple of specific things. First, be sure that when you're responding that you answer all the questions and the comments in the message. Take time to really look through it. This sounds pretty straightforward, but we've all had that experience where we sent an email with 3 questions and only 1 or 2 are answered, and we're left wondering, why didn't they answer that last question? Or we can't even move the work forward until we get the answer to that 3rd question. So we have to go back and try to get the response to that as well. Another step that you can take when communicating about maybe more complex issues is to ask if you can set up a call or a face to face meeting. Sometimes there's just no substitute for live, in the moment discussions, especially on topics that are maybe a little bit more nuanced or they just have layers that need to be built upon with feedback from other people. Another great quote from Erica's book has to do with the other side of written communication. She says, writing clearly is the new empathy. I love that. What she means by that is it's not just about being more effective, it's actually kind to the receiver if we are thoughtful and clear in our writing. That way they can understand what we're actually communicating. Now, unclear writing can cause confusion, it can cause anxiety and frustration, and just so many other negative consequences. But unclear writing also causes the flow of communication to break down, and it sometimes just stalls altogether. I can remember quite a number of situations in the past where I have just had to set a message aside, and I thought, "I don't have time to decipher this right now." The writing was confusing, it didn't help me move the work forward, so I just sat on it, and I had to delay the work that I was doing. Here's one thought on clarity, especially for leaders, that I think is really important. Sometimes we, quote, think out loud, and people interpret this as feedback that they have to act on. I've seen whole teams of people stress over how to overhaul a project because of just one throwaway comment that a CEO made saying something like, "Well, I wonder if," and then they just go on to pontificate about something. We've just got to be more intentional than that, leaders. We've got to be more intentional and more directional. When we're the boss, people often take every comment we provide as a directive. And even if we don't mean it that way, your words have impact. So be sure it's the kind of impact that you intend. Okay, we've covered some of the ways that we can improve our digital body language. Now, let's just take a minute to reflect on some next steps. And I really encourage every leader to conduct what I would call their own digital leadership audit. Take a few moments to reflect on these questions as you go about your day to day communications. First of all, number one, what does your response time communicate? Number two, do your messages create clarity or do they create anxiety? Number three, are you choosing the right channel for this particular message? And number four, have you been explicit in ways that reduce ambiguity for the reader of your message? Now, ask your team questions too. Get their input. Ask them, how does it feel to communicate with me digitally? Are you getting what you need? Getting that kind of feedback can be so valuable, and they'll appreciate it. Be sure that you also spend some time really defining that response norm that you want set in your organization. Give your team some guidance on what you expect in terms of response time to you, to clients, and maybe to vendors or other people that are important to your organization. Also, be intentional about how you model tone. You may find that you need to add a few more words or just be a little bit more intentional and specific in your punctuation. You might even want to add an emoji or two just to help convey the right tone or emotion. Don't be afraid of those things. Those are all tools, and people are ready for them. They're willing and they want more clarity in the communication. Now, often we treat digital communication as very transactional. But if you think about it, leadership is relational. Technology didn't remove body language from us, it just changed it. So take time to be deliberate. Make sure that you're assuming positive intent when others send messages. Clarify instead of just guessing or assuming. And find ways to add back in the warmth and the precision, and to do that in every communication that you send. Here are just some really simple things that you can do this next week to be more intentional with your body language. This week, just add one more sentence to your communication, one more little bit of clarity and specificity. Maybe you should move one email to a phone call. Consider responding just a little bit faster than maybe is normally expected of you. And last, be sure that you just take a moment to reread any response before you hit send. At the end of the day, communication isn't accidental. It really is built message by message, day by day. You can make a lasting impact on others even if you aren't in the same room together. But what kind of an impact will that be? Thanks for listening.
We just left the world a little bit better. Now, go do something with it.